The rain hammered against the windows of Ayla Monroe's law office in downtown Manhattan, each drop echoing the pounding of her heart as she stared at the documents spread across her mahogany desk. $3 million. The number seemed to mock her from the crisp white paper, written in her father's shaky handwriting. "How could you do this to us, Dad?" she whispered to the empty office, her fingers trembling as she traced the signature that had sealed their family's fate. Ayla had built her reputation as one of New York's most formidable civil rights attorneys, fighting for immigrants and the underprivileged with a fierce determination that had earned her respect throughout Harlem. Her natural hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, and her tailored navy suit spoke of success hard won. But none of that mattered now. Not when Ethan Monroe's gambling debts had put the entire Monroe family in the crosshairs of the most dangerous organization on the East Coast, the Clan Seo. Her phone buzzed, and Ayla's blood ran cold as she read the message. 72 hours. Pay or face consequences. Management. 72 hours, she breathed, sinking into her leather chair. Where could she possibly find $3 million in 3 days? Her savings, her practice, everything she'd worked for, wouldn't even cover a tenth of what Ethan owed. The office door opened without a knock, and Ayla's head snapped up. A man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit stood in the doorway, his presence commanding immediate attention. He was tall, easily 6 feet, with sharp Korean features and an aura of controlled power that made the air itself seem to thicken. "Ms. Monroe," his voice was smooth, cultured, with the faintest trace of an accent. "I am Seo Jin-Tae." Ayla's breath caught. She knew that name. Everyone in certain circles knew that name. The director, the man who controlled the Clan Seo with an iron fist, who had graduated from Columbia University and Harvard Business School before taking over his family's empire. "Mr. Seo," she managed, rising to her feet with as much dignity as she could muster. "I wasn't expecting—" "Your father's debt," he interrupted, stepping into the office and closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a death knell. $3 million, plus interest. His dark eyes swept over her, calculating and cold. There was something unsettling about his gaze, as if he could see straight through to her soul. He wore a heavy gold ring on his pinky finger, and Ayla noticed he never smiled. Not once. "I don't have that kind of money," Ayla said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "But I can arrange a payment plan, or perhaps we could discuss—" "There will be no payment plan." Jin-Tae moved closer, and Ayla caught a whiff of expensive cologne mixed with something darker, more dangerous. "However, I have a proposition for you." Ayla's skin prickled with unease. "What kind of proposition?" "Marriage." The word hung in the air between them like a blade. Ayla blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry. What?" "You will marry me," Jin-Tae said matter-of-factly, as if he were discussing the weather. "In exchange, your father's debt will be forgiven, and your family will be under the protection of the Clan Seo." "That's insane," Ayla breathed. "You can't be serious." "I am completely serious." Jin-Tae reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder, placing it on her desk. "I require a wife of impeccable reputation to legitimize certain business ventures. You're an accomplished attorney with no criminal record and strong community ties. You fit my requirements perfectly." Ayla stared at the folder as if it might explode. "And if I refuse?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Then your father's debt remains, and the Clan Seo will collect what is owed through alternative methods." The threat was clear, even unspoken. Ayla's mind raced, thinking of her parents in their small apartment in Harlem, of her younger brother Marcus, who was just starting college. They had no idea what Ethan had gotten them into. "You have 24 hours to decide," Jin-Tae said, turning toward the door. "I suggest you choose wisely, Ms. Monroe." As he reached for the door handle, Ayla called out, "Why me? Surely there are other women who would—" Jin-Tae paused, his hand on the door. "Other women would marry me for my money or status. You will marry me to save your family, that kind of loyalty. It cannot be bought." And then he was gone, leaving Ayla alone with the contract and the weight of an impossible choice. That night, Ayla sat in her childhood bedroom in her parents' Harlem apartment, staring at the contract Jin-Tae had left behind. The terms were surprisingly fair, considering the circumstances. She would maintain her law practice, keep her own name professionally, and receive a substantial allowance. But she would also be expected to live in the Mansao Seo, attend social functions as Jin-Tae's wife, and the rest was left deliberately vague. "Baby girl, you've been quiet all evening," her mother Grace said from the doorway. "Everything all right at work?" Ayla looked up at her mother's concerned face, taking in the worry lines that had deepened over the past few months. Grace Monroe was a strong woman who had worked 2 jobs to put Ayla through law school, never complaining, always believing in her daughter's dreams. "Mom," Ayla said softly, "what would you do if you had to choose between your principles and protecting the people you love?" Grace sat on the edge of the bed, her hand finding Ayla's. "Honey, sometimes life doesn't give us the choices we want. Sometimes we have to make the best decision we can with what we're given, even if it means sacrificing everything you've worked for." "Family comes first," Grace said firmly. "Always. But that doesn't mean you have to sacrifice who you are. You find a way to be strong, to survive, and to protect what matters most." Later that night, Ayla called Jin-Tae's number. "I accept," she said when he answered on the first ring. "Smart choice. We'll begin preparations immediately. The wedding will be in 1 week." "1 week?" Ayla's voice cracked. "That's not enough time to—" "It's more than enough time," Jin-Tae said coolly. "You'll be moved to the Mansao Seo tomorrow to begin preparations. A car will collect you at 9 a.m. The line went dead, and Ayla stared at her phone, wondering what she had just agreed to. The Mansao Seo was a fortress disguised as a home, a sprawling estate in the Hamptons that spoke of old money and older secrets. As Ayla's car pulled through the iron gates, she felt like she was entering another world entirely. The mansion itself was a masterpiece of modern architecture, blended with traditional Korean elements, all clean lines and elegant curves. Gardens stretched as far as the eye could see, meticulously maintained and beautiful in their precision. Miss Monroe, a middle-aged Korean woman, greeted her at the front door. "I am Mrs. Kim, the head housekeeper. Mr. Seo is waiting for you in his study." Ayla followed Mrs. Kim through hallways lined with priceless art and antiques, her heels clicking on marble floors that probably cost more than her annual salary. Everything was perfect, pristine, and somehow cold despite its beauty. The study was a shrine to power and education, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive desk that dominated the room. Jin-Tae sat behind it, reviewing documents with the same cold efficiency she'd witnessed in her office. "Punctual?" he noted without looking up. "Good. We have much to discuss." "Mr. Seo," Ayla began, but he held up a hand. "You will call me Jin-Tae. We are to be married, after all." He finally looked up, and again Ayla was struck by how his gaze seemed to see everything. "Your rooms are in the East Wing. You will have complete privacy, and I will respect the boundaries of our arrangement." "What exactly are the boundaries?" Ayla asked. "We will present as a married couple in public. You will attend social functions with me, support my business endeavors, and maintain the appearance of a loving wife. In private." He shrugged elegantly. "We need not pretend affection we do not feel." Something about his words stung, though Ayla couldn't say why. "And after? How long is this arrangement supposed to last?" "Indefinitely," Jin-Tae said simply. "Divorce is not an option in my family. You would do well to remember that." As Mrs. Kim led her to her rooms, Ayla couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Twice she turned around, certain she'd seen a figure in the shadows, but the hallways were empty. Her suite was larger than her entire apartment, decorated in soft blues and whites that somehow managed to feel both luxurious and welcoming. French doors opened onto a private balcony overlooking the gardens, and Ayla stepped outside to breathe in the evening air. That's when she saw him. A man stood in the garden below, partially hidden by the shadows of an ancient oak tree. Even from a distance, Ayla could see he was tall, well-built, and familiar. Her breath caught as he stepped into a patch of moonlight, revealing features that were identical to Jin-Tae's. But this man was smiling. Their eyes met across the distance, and Ayla felt something electric pass between them. Unlike Jin-Tae's cold calculation, this man's gaze was warm, almost predatory in its intensity. He raised a hand in greeting, and Ayla found herself lifting her own hand in response before she realized what she was doing. Then he was gone, melting back into the shadows, as if he'd never been there at all. The next morning brought a whirlwind of wedding preparations that left Ayla's head spinning. Designers, florists, caterers, and photographers streamed through the Mansao Seo like a well-orchestrated army, all taking orders from Jin-Tae with military precision. The ceremony will be traditional Korean, followed by a Western reception, Jin-Tae informed her over breakfast, his tone as businesslike as if he were discussing a corporate merger. You'll need to learn basic Korean customs. Mrs. Kim will instruct you. Ayla nodded, picking at her perfectly prepared meal. Will your family be attending? Something flickered in Jin-Tae's eyes, too quick to interpret. My parents are deceased. There are distant relatives who will attend for appearance's sake. What about siblings? Do you have any brothers or sisters? The silence stretched so long that Ayla looked up from her plate. Jin-Tae was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read, his jaw tight. I am an only child, he said finally, but something in his voice suggested the topic was closed. But Ayla knew what she'd seen in the garden. The man watching her had been identical to Jin-Tae in every way, except for that smile, that warmth in his eyes. Either Jin-Tae was lying, or there was something much more complicated happening in this house. Over the next few days, Ayla began to notice inconsistencies. Sometimes Jin-Tae would be cold and distant, speaking to her only when necessary. Other times, he would be warm, engaging, asking about her work and her dreams with genuine interest. You studied literature as well as business, she mentioned during one of their warmer conversations over dinner. I believe in being well-rounded, he said, refilling her wineglass. A man should understand both the art of making money and the art of living. But the next morning, when she referenced their conversation about literature, Jin-Tae looked at her blankly. I don't read fiction, he said curtly. It's a waste of time. Ayla began to pay closer attention, looking for patterns, for clues. The warm, engaging Jin-Tae never wore the heavy gold ring. The cold, distant one always did. The warm one would touch her hand during conversation, smile easily, ask about her family. The cold one maintained careful physical distance and spoke only of business matters. Mrs. Kim, Ayla said one afternoon, does Mr. Seo have any family living here? Any relatives who might visit? Mrs. Kim's expression grew carefully neutral. Only Mr. Seo lives in the main house, miss. Perhaps you saw one of the staff. But Ayla knew what she'd seen, and she was becoming increasingly certain that there were two men living in this house. Two men who looked exactly alike but were completely different in temperament. The question was, which one was she supposed to marry? The wedding day arrived with unseasonable warmth, the gardens of the Mansao Seo in full bloom as guests began to arrive. Ayla stood before the mirror in her bridal suite, barely recognizing herself in the elaborate Korean hanbok she wore for the traditional ceremony. You look beautiful, Mrs. Kim said, adjusting Ayla's veil with gentle hands. Mr. Seo is very fortunate. Which Mr. Seo? Ayla asked quietly. Mrs. Kim's hand stilled. Miss. Nothing, Ayla said, forcing a smile. Just nerves. The traditional Korean ceremony was a blur of unfamiliar rituals and formal vows spoken in both Korean and English. Jin-Tae stood beside her in traditional dress, his face an impassive mask as they went through the motions of becoming husband and wife. He wore the ring, Ayla noted. This was the cold, distant Jin-Tae. But during the Western ceremony that followed, as they exchanged rings and spoke vows that felt hollow despite their beauty, Ayla could have sworn she saw another figure in the crowd, a man who looked exactly like her groom, standing in the shadows at the back of the room, watching with an intensity that made her skin burn. When she blinked, he was gone. The reception was elegant and formal, filled with business associates and distant relatives who congratulated the couple with polite smiles and calculating eyes. Jin-Tae played his part perfectly, the devoted groom who had married for love rather than convenience. You're very quiet, he murmured during their first dance, his hand firm at her waist. Just overwhelmed, Ayla replied, trying to ignore the way her body responded to his touch. Even knowing this was all an arrangement, she couldn't deny the physical attraction. "It will get easier," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "We'll find our rhythm." For a moment, Ayla thought she saw something softer in his eyes, something that reminded her of the warm, engaging man she'd been falling for. But then the song ended, and the mask slipped back into place. Hours later, after the last guest had departed and the staff had cleaned away the remnants of the celebration, Ayla found herself alone in the master suite, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She was married, Mrs. Seo Jin-Tae. The reality of it felt surreal. She had changed out of her wedding dress into a silk nightgown that had been laid out for her, ivory silk that flowed like water over her curves, elegant and bridal without being overtly seductive. Her hands shook slightly as she brushed her hair, wondering what the night would bring. A soft knock at the door made her turn. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Kim or perhaps one of the other staff members. Instead, the door opened to reveal Jin-Tae, but something was immediately different. He'd changed out of his formal wear into dark slacks and a white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. His hair was slightly mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it, and most tellingly, he wasn't wearing the ring. This wasn't the man she'd married. This was the other one. "Hello, wife," he said softly, and his voice carried a warmth that made Ayla's pulse quicken. "You shouldn't be here," Ayla whispered, though she made no move to ask him to leave. "Shouldn't I?" He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "You're my brother's wife now, but you were mine first." "I don't understand, don't you?" He moved closer, and Ayla caught that scent she'd noticed during their warmer conversations, cologne mixed with something uniquely masculine. "You know the difference between us. You've always known." Ayla's breath caught. "Who are you?" "I'm Seo Jin-Tae," he said, his voice low and intimate. "And I've been watching you, wanting you since the moment my brother decided to make you his." "This is insane," Ayla breathed, but she didn't step away as he approached. "Is it? Or is it the most honest thing that's happened since you walked into our lives?" Jin-Tae reached up and gently touched her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Tell me you don't feel it too. Tell me you haven't been thinking about me." Ayla wanted to lie, wanted to maintain some semblance of moral high ground, but the truth was written all over her face. She had been thinking about him, about the warmth in his eyes, the way he made her feel seen and valued, rather than purchased. "This is wrong," she whispered. "Everything about this situation is wrong," Jin-Tae agreed, stepping closer until there was barely an inch between them. "You were forced into marriage with a man who sees you as a business asset, but what I feel for you, that's the only real thing in this whole mess. Your brother. My brother got what he wanted, a respectable wife to legitimize his business dealings, but he doesn't want you, Ayla, not the way I do." Before she could protest further, Jin-Tae's lips found hers in a kiss that was nothing like what she'd expected from the cold, calculating man she'd married. This kiss was passionate, desperate, full of weeks of suppressed longing and desire. Ayla knew she should push him away, should remind him that she was married to his brother, should maintain the boundaries that propriety demanded. Instead, she found herself kissing him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt as months of confusion and attraction finally found their outlet. "I've wanted to do that since the first night I saw you on the balcony," Jin-Tae murmured against her lips. "That was you in the garden," Ayla breathed. "That was me at dinner. That was me asking about your dreams. Every moment that mattered, every conversation that felt real, that was me." The confession should have shocked her, but instead it felt like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. Of course it had been him. The man who had made her laugh and asked about her work bore no resemblance to the cold businessman who had bought her like property. "Why?" she asked. "Why pretend to be him?" Jin-Tae's expression grew pained. "Because I live in his shadow. Because everything he wants he gets, and I'm left with whatever scraps he deigns to throw my way. But you, I wasn't going to let him have you without a fight. So you made me fall for you while thinking you were him." "I made you fall for the real me," Jin-Tae corrected. The man I am when I'm not pretending to be the perfect heir, the dutiful son, the responsible leader. With you, I could just be myself. Ayla's head was spinning. Everything she thought she knew about her situation had been turned upside down. She'd married one man while falling in love with another, and they were identical twins who had been playing an elaborate game of deception. "This is crazy," she said. But even as she spoke, Jin-Kyu was backing her toward the massive four-poster bed, his hands gentle but insistent. "Crazy would be letting you spend your wedding night alone while my brother conducts business calls in his office," Jin-Kyu said. "Crazy would be pretending I don't want you more than I've ever wanted anything in my life." "He's your brother," Ayla protested weakly. "He's my twin," Jin-Kyu corrected. "We've shared everything our entire lives. Toys, clothes, responsibilities, expectations. But this is mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed her, but instead it sent heat pooling low in her belly. When had anyone ever wanted her with such intensity? When had anyone ever looked at her like she was worth fighting for? "Ayla," Jin-Kyu whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. "Let me show you what it feels like to be wanted, not just needed." And despite every rational thought screaming in her head, despite the wrongness of the situation and the complications it would create, Ayla found herself nodding. Jin-Kyu's hands were gentle as he reached for the silk ties of her nightgown, his eyes never leaving hers as he slowly revealed the body that legally belonged to his brother, but emotionally belonged to him. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with reverence and desire. What followed was a night of passion unlike anything Ayla had ever experienced. Jin-Kyu worshipped her body with a reverence that made her feel like a goddess, his touch gentle yet demanding, his whispered words of desire and admiration healing wounds she didn't even know she carried. In his arms, she wasn't a commodity or a business arrangement. She was a woman desired and cherished, and for a few precious hours, nothing else mattered. They made love with the desperate intensity of people who knew their time was stolen, borrowed, forbidden. Jin-Kyu was tender and passionate, taking his time to learn every inch of her body, to discover what made her gasp and arch beneath him. "Mine," he whispered against her throat as they moved together in perfect rhythm. "You're mine, Ayla. No matter what the papers say, no matter what name you wear, you're mine." "Yes," she gasped, lost in sensation and emotion. "Yes, I'm yours." They lay tangled in silk sheets afterward, Ayla's head on Jin-Kyu's chest as his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. The room was lit only by moonlight streaming through the windows, casting everything in silver and shadow. "What happens now?" Ayla asked quietly. "Now we figure out how to be together without destroying everything," Jin-Kyu said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Your brother will find out. My brother gets what he wants from this marriage: legitimacy, respectability, a beautiful wife to show off at social functions. He doesn't need to know about this." "You want me to live a lie?" Jin-Kyu was quiet for a long moment. "I want you to be happy. If that means we have to be careful, if it means we can only have stolen moments like this, it's better than nothing." Ayla wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways this could go wrong, but exhaustion was pulling at her. She'd deal with the complications tomorrow. Tonight, she just wanted to stay in this bubble of warmth and desire and pretend that the world outside didn't exist. She was just drifting off to sleep when she heard it, the soft sound of a door handle turning. Ayla's eyes snapped open, and she looked toward the entrance to the master suite. The door was opening slowly, silently, and a figure stepped into the room. Jin-Tae. The real Jin-Tae. Still wearing his wedding suit, the heavy gold ring catching the moonlight as his hand gripped the doorframe. He stood frozen in the doorway, his dark eyes taking in the scene before him, his wife naked in his brother's arms, silk sheets tangled around their bodies, the unmistakable evidence of what had just taken place. For a moment nobody moved, nobody breathed. The silence stretched taut as a wire ready to snap. On wedding night he opened the door and froze. Jin-Tae's face was a mask of cold fury, but underneath Ayla could see something else: hurt, betrayal, perhaps even a flicker of something that looked like pain. "Well," he said finally, his voice like winter itself. "This is Illuminating. Jin-Kyu sat up slowly, making no attempt to cover himself or apologize. "Brother, don't." Jin-Tae held up a hand, his eyes never leaving Ayla's face. "Don't say a word." He stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. His movements were controlled, precise, but Ayla could see the tension radiating from his body like heat from a forge. "I came to check on my wife," Jin-Tae said, each word carefully measured, "to see if she needed anything on our wedding night. How thoughtful of my brother to assist in her needs." "Jin-Tae," Ayla began, clutching the sheet to her chest. "No." His voice cut through her words like a blade. "You don't get to speak, not yet." He moved to the window, his back to them as he stared out at the moonlit gardens. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of their breathing and the distant whisper of wind through the trees. "Forced to marry the Korean Mafia boss twins," Jin-Tae said finally, his voice soft but carrying clearly in the quiet room. "I never expected my wife would take that quite so literally." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Ayla felt the weight of her choices settling over her like a shroud. She was caught between two brothers, two men who were identical in appearance but completely different in every way that mattered, and she had no idea what happened next. Jin-Tae turned from the window, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "Get dressed," he said quietly. "Both of you. We need to talk." Jin-Tae, "Let me explain," Jin-Kyu began, but his brother cut him off with a look. "Explanation can wait. Damage control cannot." 20 minutes later, they sat in Jin-Tae's private study, the same room where Ayla had first learned the boundaries of their arrangement. Those boundaries had just been obliterated, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Ayla wore a silk robe, her hair hastily pinned up, feeling exposed despite being covered. Jin-Kyu had dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, his usual casual confidence replaced by wary alertness. Jin-Tae remained in his wedding suit, though he'd loosened his tie and removed his jacket. "Explain," Jin-Tae said simply, settling behind his desk like a judge preparing to render verdict. "There's nothing to explain," Jin-Kyu said. "You saw what you saw." "What I saw," Jin-Tae replied carefully, "was my brother in bed with my wife on my wedding night. What I want to know is how long this has been going on." Ayla found her voice. "It hasn't been going on. Tonight was the first time we—" "But not the first time you wanted to," Jin-Tae observed. "I've seen the way you look at him, the way you respond to him. I thought it was me you were responding to, but it was him all along, wasn't it?" The question hung in the air, and Ayla realized there was no point in lying anymore. "Yes," she said quietly. "I fell for him, thinking he was you. But he's not you. He's nothing like you." "No," Jin-Tae agreed. "He's not. Jin-Kyu has always been the charming one, the one who makes people feel special. I'm the one who makes the hard decisions, who carries the weight of responsibility. I'm the one who saves people, even when they don't want to be saved." "You didn't save me," Ayla said. "You bought me." "Did I?" Jin-Tae's smile was cold. "Because from where I sit, it looks like I gave you exactly what you wanted, a way to protect your family and an excuse to explore your attraction to my brother. That's not, isn't it?" Jin-Tae stood, moving around the desk to lean against it. "You're an intelligent woman, Ayla. You figured out there were two of us weeks ago. You could have confronted me, demanded answers, insisted on clarity, but you didn't. You played along because it gave you what you wanted, the safety of marriage to me and the excitement of an affair with him." The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to hurt. Ayla had suspected, had known on some level, that she was dealing with two different men, but she'd chosen not to dig deeper because the fantasy had been too appealing. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now," Jin-Tae said, "we deal with the consequences of your choices." "Our choices," Jin-Kyu corrected. "I'm the one who pursued her. I'm the one who made her fall for me while she thought I was you. If you want to be angry with someone, be angry with me." "Oh, I am angry with you," Jin-Tae said softly. But you've always taken what you wanted without considering the consequences. This is just the latest example. And what about what Ayla wants? Jin-Kyu demanded. She's not property to be fought over. Isn't she? Jin-Tae's gaze moved to Ayla. You signed a contract. You took my name. You made vows. Legally and morally, you belong to me. People don't belong to other people, Ayla said. In my world, they do, Jin-Tae replied. The question is, what are we going to do about this? Complication. Before anyone could answer, Ayla's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and felt the blood drain from her face. What is it? Jin-Kyu asked, noticing her expression. Wu Liang, she whispered. He says he has photos. Of tonight. Of us. The room went deadly silent. Jin-Tae's expression didn't change. But Ayla could see the calculation in his eyes, the wheels turning as he processed this new threat. Show me, he said. With trembling hands, Ayla opened the message and turned her phone toward the brothers. The photo was grainy, taken through the bedroom window with a telephoto lens, but it was clear enough. Jin-Kyu and Ayla in bed together, unmistakably intimate. He wants to meet, Ayla said, reading the rest of the message. Tomorrow night, alone. Absolutely not, both brothers said simultaneously. He says if I don't come, he'll send the photos to every business associate of the clan Seo, every news outlet in the city. He'll destroy your reputation, your business, everything. Jin-Tae was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through the implications. This changes everything, he said finally. How? Ayla asked. Because now we're not just dealing with a family scandal. We're dealing with blackmail, with an external threat that could destroy everything we've built. Jin-Tae looked between Ayla and Jin-Kyu. Wu Liang has given us a common enemy. The question is, are we going to face it together or let it tear us apart? Together, Jin-Kyu said without hesitation. Ayla? Jin-Tae's gaze was steady, waiting. Ayla thought about her family, about the child she might be carrying, about the two men who had turned her world upside down in completely different ways. Together, she agreed. Good. Jin-Tae moved back to his desk, pulling out a secure phone. Then we're going to need a plan. And we're going to need to trust each other completely, no matter what happens next. As he began making calls, arranging meetings, setting wheels in motion, Ayla realized that her wedding night had changed everything. Not just her relationship with the brothers, but the entire dynamic of their world. She was no longer just Jin-Tae's purchased bride or Jin-Kyu's secret lover. She was a player in a dangerous game, and the stakes had just gotten infinitely higher. 2 months later, Ayla stood in the marble bathroom of the master suite, staring at the small plastic stick in her trembling hands. 2 pink lines, positive, pregnant. The irony wasn't lost on her. After everything that had happened, after Wu Liang's threats had been neutralized and the brothers had reached an uneasy truce about sharing her affections, she was carrying a child whose paternity would remain forever uncertain. Because in the weeks following her wedding night, both brothers had claimed their place in her bed and her heart. Jin-Tae with his controlled passion and hidden vulnerability. Jin-Kyu with his warmth and desperate devotion. She loved them both, and now she was carrying a child that could belong to either of them. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Ayla? Jin-Tae's voice concerned. Are you all right? She opened the door to find both brothers waiting, their faces immediately shifting to alarm when they saw her expression. What's wrong? Jin-Kyu asked. Wordlessly, Ayla held up the pregnancy test. For a moment, both men stared at the little plastic stick. Then Jin-Tae stepped forward and gently took it from her hands, his expression unreadable. How far along? He asked quietly. 8 weeks, I think. 8 weeks. Which meant the baby could have been conceived on her wedding night with Jin-Kyu, or during any of the nights since then with either brother. It doesn't matter, Jin-Kyu said suddenly. Whose it is biologically, it doesn't matter. This baby belongs to all of us. Doesn't it matter? Ayla asked. Don't you want to know? No, Jin-Tae said firmly. Some secrets are more valuable than truth. This child will be a Seo raised by both of us, loved by all of us. The question of genetics is irrelevant. But, no buts, Jin-Kyu interrupted, pulling her into his arms. We're a family, Ayla. Unconventional, complicated, probably scandalous by most people's standards. But we're a family, and families protect each other no matter what. As both men embraced her, Ayla felt something settle in her chest, not quite peace, but acceptance. She'd been forced to marry the Korean Mafia boss twins, but somewhere along the way she'd chosen to love them both, and now they were going to have a baby. The future was uncertain, complicated, probably dangerous, but for the first time since this whole mess began, Ayla felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 6 months into her pregnancy, Ayla's life had settled into a rhythm that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. The three of them had found their balance, Jin-Tae with his protective intensity, Jin-Kyu with his passionate devotion, and Ayla at the center of it all, somehow managing to love them both without losing herself in the process. But Wu Liang's blackmail attempt had taught them all a valuable lesson. Their unconventional arrangement made them vulnerable to outside threats, which was why Jin-Tae's proposal, when it came, wasn't entirely unexpected. "Marry him too," he said one evening, as they sat in their shared bedroom, Ayla's growing belly a visible reminder of their complicated situation. "I'm sorry, what?" Ayla looked up from her book, certain she'd misheard. "Marry Jin-Kyu, officially, in a traditional Korean ceremony that will bind you to both of us legally and culturally." "That's not even possible," Ayla protested. "Polygamy is illegal." "Polygamy, yes, but a traditional Korean ceremony that recognizes shared responsibility for family and children? That's different. It's cultural, spiritual, binding in ways that matter to our world, even if the law doesn't recognize it." Jin-Kyu, who had been quietly listening, leaned forward. "Why now?" "Because our child deserves the protection that comes with being claimed by both fathers," Jin-Tae said. "Because Ayla deserves the security of knowing she belongs to both of us completely. And because the next time someone tries to use our situation against us, they'll find themselves facing not a scandal, but a tradition." "A tradition?" Ayla asked. "Shared wives, shared responsibility, shared protection. It's not common, but it's not unheard of in certain circles, especially when the survival of a family line is at stake." Ayla looked between the two brothers, seeing the hope and fear in their eyes. "And you're both okay with this, really?" "More than okay," Jin-Kyu said. "I want to claim you publicly, want the world to know that you're mine as much as his. And I want to stop pretending that what we have is anything other than what it is," Jin-Tae added. "A family. Unconventional, but real." 3 weeks later, Ayla stood in the private chapel on the Seo grounds for the second time, wearing a traditional Korean hanbok in deep red silk. This time the ceremony was smaller, more intimate, with only Mrs. Kim and a few trusted staff members as witnesses. Jin-Kyu stood beside her, handsome in traditional Korean dress, his eyes never leaving her face as they spoke vows that were both ancient and utterly modern in their complexity. Jin-Tae stood to the side, not as a guest but as a participant, his presence a reminder that this wasn't a normal wedding, but something else entirely. "Do you, Ayla Monroe Seo, take Seo Jin-Kyu as your husband, to honor and protect, sharing your heart and your life with both brothers in the bonds of family?" the elderly Korean minister asked. Ayla's voice was steady as she replied, "I do." "Do you, Seo Jin-Kyu, take Ayla Monroe Seo as your wife, to cherish and defend, sharing her with your brother in the ancient tradition of family protection?" "I do," Jin-Kyu said firmly. The minister turned to Jin-Tae. "Do you, Seo Jin-Tae, accept this union and pledge to honor the bonds of shared responsibility and protection?" "I do," Jin-Tae said, his voice carrying the weight of ancient tradition and modern love. As Jin-Kyu slipped a second wedding ring onto Ayla's finger, this one a band of white gold set with emeralds, she felt the surreal nature of her situation settle over her like a blessing rather than a burden. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said, and Jin-Kyu's lips found hers in a kiss that was gentle, reverent, and full of promise. When they broke apart, Jin-Tae stepped forward and kissed her as well, acclaiming a reminder, a celebration wrapped in the guise of tradition. "Welcome to the family," he murmured against her lips, and this time Ayla knew he was being completely sincere. The months that followed were the happiest of Ayla's life. Her law practice flourished under the protection of the clan Seo, allowing her to take on cases she'd never been able to handle before. Her pregnancy progressed smoothly, with both brothers attending every appointment, reading every book, preparing for their child with the dedication of men who had waited their entire lives for this moment. "Have you thought about names?" Jin-Kyu asked one evening as they sat in the garden, his hand resting on Ayla's rounded belly. "A few," Ayla admitted, "but I keep thinking. What if the baby looks exactly like one of you? What if there's no question about paternity?" "Would it change anything?" Jin-Tae asked from his position on her other side. "Would it change anything for you?" Ayla countered. The brothers exchanged a look over her head. "We've discussed it," Jin-Tae said carefully. "Whatever the biological reality, this child will be raised by both of us. Biology is just genetics. Family is choice." "But you must be curious," Ayla pressed. "Of course we're curious," Jin-Kyu admitted, "but we're also committed to never finding out. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. What if the child wants to know someday? Then we'll tell them the truth," Jin-Tae said. "That they were conceived in love, born into a family that wanted them desperately, and raised by two fathers who would die to protect them. The rest is just details." The peaceful bubble they'd created was tested when Ayla went into labor 3 weeks early. She was in her office at the mansion, reviewing case files, when the first contraction hit. "Mrs. Kim," she called, gripping the edge of her desk as pain radiated through her body. Within minutes, the mansion was in controlled chaos. Both brothers appeared as if by magic, Jin-Tae barking orders into his phone while Jin-Kyu helped Ayla to the car. "It's too early," Ayla gasped as another contraction hit. "The baby will be fine," Jin-Tae said firmly, though she could see the worry in his eyes. "Everything will be fine." The labor was long and difficult, but both brothers were with her every step of the way. Jin-Kyu held her hand and whispered words of encouragement, while Jin-Tae paced the room like a caged tiger, ready to fight anyone who suggested his wife and child weren't receiving the best possible care. "She's coming," the doctor announced, and Ayla pushed with everything she had, desperate to meet the child who had been the center of their world for months. "It's a girl," the doctor said, and the sound of a baby's cry filled the room. "Is she?" Ayla asked weakly. "Perfect," Jin-Tae said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's absolutely perfect." They placed the baby in Ayla's arms, and she looked down at the tiny face that was unmistakably Seo, the dark hair, the delicate features, the serious expression that reminded her of both brothers. "What will we call her?" Jin-Kyu asked softly, tears streaming down his face. "Sophia," Ayla said without hesitation. "Sophia Seo. It means wisdom." "Sophia," Jin-Tae repeated, reaching out to stroke his daughter's cheek. "Perfect." As they sat together in the hospital room, Ayla holding their daughter while both brothers looked on with wonder, she realized that the question of paternity had become irrelevant. This child belonged to all of them, born of love and protected by the fierce devotion of two fathers who would move heaven and earth to keep her safe. "She's ours," Ayla said quietly, "all of ours. Forever." Both brothers agreed in unison. 2 years later, Ayla stood in the garden of the Mansao Seo, watching Jin-Tae and Jin-Kyu play with 2-year-old Sophia and 6-month-old James. The second pregnancy had been planned, wanted, celebrated by all three of them. And like his sister, James's paternity remained a beautiful mystery. "Mama!" Sophia called, running toward Ayla on unsteady legs. "Look what Daddy Jin-Tae taught me." She proceeded to demonstrate a perfect bow, the kind used in traditional Korean greetings. Jin-Kyu applauded enthusiastically, while Jin-Tae beamed with pride. "Very good, sweetheart," Ayla said, scooping her daughter up for a hug. "Did you thank Daddy Jin-Tae?" "Thank you, Daddy," Sophia called, and Jin-Tae's face lit up with joy. It had taken time to work out the logistics of their family. Sophia called both men Daddy, with their first names attached for clarity. To the outside world, Jin-Tae was her father, and Jin-Kyu was her devoted uncle. But within their family, Both men shared parental responsibilities equally. "Any regrets?" Jin-Kyu asked that evening as they sat on their bedroom balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "About what?" Ayla asked, though she knew what he meant. "About being forced to marry the Korean Mafia boss twins," Jin-Tae said with a slight smile. "About having your wedding night interrupted. About ending up with 2 husbands and 2 children whose paternity will forever remain a mystery." Ayla considered the question seriously. 2 years ago, she'd been a single attorney struggling to make a difference in the world. Now she was the wife of 2 powerful men, the mother of 2 beautiful children, and somehow still managing to practice law and fight for the causes she believed in. "No regrets," she said finally. "Not a single one." "Even about the unconventional nature of our arrangement?" Jin-Kyu pressed. "Especially about that," Ayla said firmly. "Conventional would have been boring. This is an adventure. An adventure that started with blackmail and forced marriage," Jin-Tae pointed out. "And ended with love and family," Ayla countered. "Sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places." As if to prove her point, Sophia's laughter drifted up from the garden below, where she was chasing fireflies with the dedication of a child who believed in magic. "She's going to be a handful," Jin-Kyu observed. "Good," Jin-Tae said. "The world needs more women who refuse to be contained." "Like her mother," Jin-Kyu added, pressing a kiss to Ayla's temple. "Exactly like her mother." Jin-Tae agreed. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Ayla reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She'd been forced to marry the Korean Mafia boss twins, but somewhere along the way, she'd chosen to love them both, and they'd chosen to love her back, creating something unprecedented and unbreakable. On her wedding night, Jin-Tae had opened the door and froze, discovering his wife in his brother's arms. It should have been the end of everything. Instead, it had been the beginning of something beautiful. "This baby belongs to both of you, and I belong to this family," she whispered, repeating the words she'd spoken after Sophia's birth, but with a deeper understanding of their truth. She belonged here, with them, in this beautiful, complicated, impossible life they'd built together, and she wouldn't change a single moment of the journey that had brought her home.